Welcome to the Cryptozoology Show with your host, the Cryptozoologist. And this episode will cover early history of some UFO, some early photos and stuff that not too many people see and things like that. Do aliens monitor us? Some early good sort of mentions about some alien crashes, a little bit about sort of the grim reapers of the sort of era through the Black Plague and the alien sort of connection to that, and some other weird tidbits here and there. It's a bit of a mixture of different ones. But there was another show that I do that I cover a bunch of these. But at the beginning, it's longer, and a lot of people are missing out on some good films and there and some stuff that were they're authentic things. They're not CGI. I researched them extremely all of these ones and the thing is that they're a lot of them are way older before these things existed. They passed the negatives weren't tampered with. There's all kinds of things that I can't start giving the Joe Nichols sort of answers, right, and sort of thing. And I wanted to talk about also a UFO crash that I witnessed there that I talked about in several other shows, but I never actually told you the whole sort of thing of it, every bit of detail of it. And I think it's important because there definitely is a cover up there of some sort. What we saw, I was with three other people in a boat, and there was numerous other boats floating around in the dark sort of thing like that, and we could see quite clearly what was all going on and sort of thing like this. And we saw a lot of weird things. And interestingly, this whole story's been shut up. It's not even ever talked about. They always talk about Shag Harbor or, of course, Roswell and all this sort of stuff. But this was not a meteor that landed here right in our Gatineau River at the mouth of the Gatineau and Ottawa River sort of area. And it's very interesting. Anyway, so we'll cover that later. But first, I wanted to cover about some different sort of early UFOs and how things have been being seen in our skies since time began, sort of thing like that. And, it'll be interesting. You'll find a lot of sort of different sort of things that you wouldn't typically sort of run across. It'll make you wonder, right? Like in 329 BC, Alexander the Great, the developer of horse whispering and owner of a possible unicorn. There's an actual ancient coin that I show on one of my sites there where that was supposed to be Alexander the Great, and he's riding this sort of four-horse chariots, except one of the horses is quite interesting. He's slightly darker than the other three. They make him in the coin, and he's got a great big giant unicorn horn coming out of his head. He also mentions this, that he saw one in the confines of Germany, right? And this sort of thing. Now, interestingly, when he tried to sort of cross into the Ganges and invade sort of India and that, even though this guy was spoken to in visions and seeming the weird sort of stuff like this, all of these great leaders that have sort of done amazing sort of stuff, everybody from Christopher Columbus to many, many ones, all had some kind of interesting interaction with a UFO-ish like thing, or had dreams or something. My suggestion is very simple, that there is life out there that monitors us, probably created us, and that they actually suggest to certain people that they know is going to get the job done through some kind of dreams, sort of thing. So, I mean, it would make perfect sense if you helped create us, or we were already here and you advanced us with some kind of technology, whatever scenario. It doesn't matter. I know the Giorgio guy doesn't probably believe maybe in the typical, maybe he does believe in God as well, I have no idea, or that sort of thing, but it sounds like when I listen to those guys, Daniken, lots of those guys, I fully agree with these people on almost every sort of aspect of these sort of things. There's definitely is aliens, right? The only difference is that I sort of would suspect that some of these aliens, whatever this is, this angel group, and this guy that talks to you in visions and stuff like that, highly likely is some kind of sort of very powerful leader of these sorts of things. And maybe it's quite true that in ancient times that some kind of intelligent being from the sky come down. he decides to either he sees ape men down here and says, hey, they sort of look like our race a little bit, except we're not furry and we're much more intelligent. I wonder if we added some of our sort of stuff to them, what would occur? And then they start an experiment, like a giant TV show sort of thing. And this has been going on since time began. And every time when we get way too large in population, overly sort of violent and crazy, different sort of things where it's not fitting into their studies anymore, well, then the study cleans house. And you start anew. You find this with every professor going on the planet. The guy will be working on something, and if he realizes, no, I could never BS my way through a lecture here to convince them that horses really came from flying saucers and that they were first created by eating prune juice gas. He realizes that most people aren't going to buy this, no matter how good of a pitchman that he is. So then he starts off at the drawing board again with a new imagination to sort of fit that it may look like this could be plausible sort of for his theory and things like this. So they start anew, right? And they start their whole sort of process all over again, sort of thing like that. Scrap the stuff. Companies do this all the time. They experiment with new products and then they end up being on the shelf because something's wrong. A part of the equation is not working out for the consumer or whatever, or things like that, and it's not making them any money. So then they start again, right? So the same thing would apply when he says you were created in his own image. Okay, that would highly indicate then that if it is a race of beings from the sky, some mighty leader, let's say this god guy, by doing this, they're now wanting to watch a primitive sort of version of themselves, sort of what they would do and this sort of thing like this, to see what all the experimentations to it, and just like any scientist would. Could you imagine, I don't know, Linus Pauling and all the gang, and they were landed on Mars, and all of a sudden they see these Martians living in a sort of a cave here, and then these Martians are going ooh 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 like this. You telling me that they wouldn't want to do the same thing? They would be hiding behind the mountains of little hills of Mars with cameras. They'd be all curious about everything from their bowel movements to how many times that they scratched their chin. And this is what the whole scientific thing is about, right? So the same thing would apply, but you see these scientists, the guy that's his mommy convinced him he's highly intelligent, is sort of a human being, which if half these guys, if they wouldn't even last in the forest an hour, because they're only intelligent in the things that they've sort of studied upon. There's 5 million things they're naive about all kinds of other things, and so they're actually of below zero value compared to a lot of average human beings. I mean, if I was out in the forest, I'd much rather prefer to find, let's say I was walking with Bob Gimlin and some hypothetical neuroscientist guy that's, I don't know, some wild brain surgeon or something, and creates all these new techniques, and now we're lost in the forest. I would find the neurosurgeon guy with his new techniques below, and I mean below zero value, right? But I certainly would find Bob Gimlin, a native tracker, much more sort of likely that I'm going to make it out alive with this man's help compared to this one's, right? So people sort of, because everybody has a mommy, and mommy taught them that they were the most wonderful and babied them, and the mother all wants to brag, and the father wants to brag about how genius their son is. People sort of gobbledygook up this stuff because somebody's talking on a podium, but they don't realize that the science that they're pitching is actually, most of the stuff each time they're pitching it is already proved wrong by somebody new, or at least they claim that they proved it wrong. Right? Because each new scientist wants his own paper and this sort of thing like that. Like I said, there's real science you can duplicate. As you put on a balance beam, Okay, so if I put I don't know, I put the tracker Bob Gimlin, along with there's a young fellow there. I caught a few of his shows. If you've never seen him, he does a much more meticulous job than I do. But we think very similar in a lot of aspects. When I've seen some of his stuff, we have the same kind of mind here where I'm looking beyond this sort of stuff like this. I'm just not going to accept the silly Joe Nichols like answer if it doesn't, if it's not applicable to this sort of thing, right? This sort of thing. But if I put then the researcher, Bob Giblin, and I put those two on a balance beam this way, now I put on the other sort of side Joe Nichols, it's likely that these two, the tracker and the researcher, is going to weigh more, and every time, no matter what, unless he did something to adjust his sort of weight, every time guaranteed that those two are going to land on the ground first. They're going to go down, the other one's going to go up, right? So these are normal sort of scientific things that you can replicate 10 million times. But when some guy says that a fossil is 10 million years old, the machine was programmed to state this on a theory. There is actually no scientific backing that could be proved in a court of law of absolutely any of these sort of things. Also, one would wonder, why is there thousands of examples of dinosaur bones where they have cartilage in them and blood and still tissue that is soft? Do you really believe that that could have lasted for 65 million years? Right? So, like, I mean, these sort of things. No, I'm sure maybe even the Bob Gimlin does. Maybe both of them do. I don't. These things no matter. We're all on the same side of the fact that we're just not going to accept some silly sort of ridiculous answer as a feasibility. If it is a feasibility, great. I'll certainly go along with Joe Nichols 100%. If I see a log pop out of the river, and I can clearly see that it's a log, and I can see on the picture where somebody says they saw the Loch Ness Monster, and I can clearly see it's a log, then yes, it's a log. But I'm not going to start lying and saying it was a log when I can see a 5-foot head coming out of the water and started eating fish. Or if, let's say, Jacques Cousteau standing there, right? Like he was one of my early sort of inspirations, a Jacques Cousteau sort of guy, and these early marine biologists and all these different things like that. People like that, if somebody like that is a very good witness that is watched and observed, isn't going to panic, looks at the monster, he's analyzing it, he's this and that, I find this guy a good witness, right? Compared to sort of like somebody else that would be sort of like, if the person's I don't know, Bubba Joe, and he's the only thing he's ever done in his entire life is play Nintendo for an hour and smoke crack all day. Well, yeah, he could be telling the truth just as well. I'm not going to discount him because of his habits, because I've met people that are crazy drugs or different stuff like that. To tell you the truth, like as far as like some of these explanations that they give, like these kinds of answers, I mean, a lot of them are ridiculous. Now, anybody would sort of absorb them as silly. Not once in my entire life of being with, literally, when I was a kid, we didn't have Nintendo much or any of these kinds of stuff. We didn't have these sort of things. So the only thing you could do, most of the teenage Canadian kids already at 15, 14, 12 even younger, some of them, all of these kids would have a beer from their daddy or mommy or something like that. They'd go out camping and fishing along. A lot of the parents would just let the kids go wander off and whatever. Now, they were sort of like, they had to come back and they'd come looking for them eventually, sort of thing like that. But there was a lot of sort of huckleberry finish like sort of stuff. People weren't worried about Bugsy eating you or kidnapping you or this sort of stuff. These things didn't exist very much, just extremely rarely, right? So the sort of, it was a different sort of a world then than certainly what it is today of that sort of thing like that. And the thing is that these, not once And out of 10 zillion drunks where the guy's like fighting with his wife and they're having or two guys killing each other down the street and 5 million bars that I walked by. I sadly lived in a few wild areas over the ages, from the United States to Canada, all over the place, and stuff like this. And these sort of the things that I saw is mind boggling in cities that were much more terrifying than Bigfoot could ever sort of be. But not once did I ever see any of these people say, you're Bigfoot, or you're, none of these things. People don't hallucinate pink pigs when they're drunk. They get all stupid and they might want to fight with you or do all kinds of weird stuff. There's all kinds of characters. Or the woman will take a bitch fit and start freaking out on the guy and to make a scene in a bar and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you see all these sorts of stuff. I watched a drunk lady that was known here in our city. I mean, if you think Bigfoot's improbable, how improbable would you be of this? There was a drunken lady that got free beer for decades by simply going into bars. She would then keep her sort of top low and stuff like this, find whatever senior guy was sitting there, mumble a bit and ask for water. Then the guy, of course, would offer her beer, being a gentleman. And then after, then another one and another one. Now she's a little bit in the bag. To get other new more beers and stuff like this, she would take her eyeball out of her sort of a skull and put it in a glass and and swing it around and say, you want to see my magic lucky eyeball? If you drink from it and stuff like this, you'll get sort of a wish. All these weird sort of stuff she would do. So then, of course, these drunks, the more she would hit the right time of day when there was already, some people half in the bag and stuff like this and would get into this sort of thing. And she provided herself all kinds of free drinks and sort of stuff like this. There used to be another lady, they called her the Leprechaun Lady. She used to go to the Newfoundland pub. If you're from the Ottawa region, you might recognize, I don't know if it still exists, but one of the greatest, fun, most entertaining places you can possibly imagine. A sort of thing. I kissed a cod and I was sort of accepted by the Newfoundland clan, so they get you up in this raincoat and the whole do. I mean, it's extremely entertaining, right? But I sort of think so. If you've never kissed a cod, you got to do that. Go down to the Newfoundland pub or any Newfie like sort of place there. Though they can sort of maybe get you into the gang and sort of stuff like that. And then you can go on a Mumford with them or whatever they call that. I don't remember the name. It's something close to that. But you put these sheets on and nobody knows who you are, and then you can mooch free booze from door to door, right? Sort of stuff. But the bottom line is I have all these sort of people. None of them I ever seen hallucinate like that, even when they were on sort of all kinds of other drugs, obviously of different sorts. And not a single time I see this. Never. And like literally, and I'm a person who loves watching. I like sitting, watching, and entertainment. I used to love going into sort of a bar there, not to get drunk myself, but to just sit there, have 1 quart of beer, and watch the entertainment. There was a great place that was out in our east end of our city. You'd go in there, guaranteed within 5 minutes, you'd have some old senior lady coming up and saying, "Hi there, young sexy, what are you doing?" It's like this within 5 minutes. Usually, sadly, with no sort of hygiene much left on her, sort of thing like this, and all reeking of some kind of cheap Chanel No. 5 sort of knockoff. But then all of a sudden, a Bugsy guy or two would come in and they'd open up their jacket, and inside of it, they'd have everything from steaks to, once I did actually buy off the guy. The guy had several hundred plastic worms in a bag, and he wanted to sell them for a quart of beer, so I bought him a quart of beer. I got some plastic worms, right? It was a young fellow, and I used a lot of fishing equipment, so 200 plastic worms for a quart of beer sounded like a good deal, and he seemed like he wanted a quart, plus he was the size of Mount Vesuvius, and I figured it'd be better he's on my good side, not bad one. Right? So anyways, I bought him a beer. I didn't mind. I wasn't really too nervous that. He seemed friendly enough. But the thing is that out of all these sort of people watching the craziest characters that you could ever imagine, from a guy driving around in a Taco Veal trying to run people over to all kinds of stuff, and not one single time has any of them seen a pink elephant or hallucinated any of these sorts of stuff. So this is not real. This is fake. Fake thing used by people that have obviously never really been that drunk before or anything, because I've been drunk quite a few times over the ages there. I'm not a drinker really. Like when I was young, that's all we had to do on the weekends. So yeah, I would drink on the weekends and stuff like that. But besides that, though, I didn't drink like weekdays or anything like that. It was just sort of a weekend warrior, they call them. Yeah, on a Friday, Saturday night, I wanted to boogie on down with the ladies and all that kind of crap, and you'd go out to some sort of shindig and or some wild bar, and we used to have all kinds of wild stuff. Like we used to have this one. It was called the Chaudière. Okay, and I mean, this was the wildest place you ever seen in your entire life. They had a guard there that, if you think aliens are hard to believe in, this guy was so tough that he would take on biker gangs and fight with them. This guy was stabbed multi times and he'd get right up and start scrapping with you again. I watched him wrestle a naked lady as she was all enthralled with some young stud sort of band, early sort of maybe 80s band of some sort, right? And so she decided to get up on the table and take off the top and then rip off her shorts, and now she was in some kind of early thongish like underwear of some sort that seemed way too small for the size of her. Meanwhile, this giant famous bodyguard, his name was Jerry, he starts bolting up towards her, wrapped his arms around her boobs in a wrestling thing, and the two of them started wrestling all through the sort of place, and he picked her up and sort of actually carried her to the door, somehow got the door open and flung her out by her boobs, basically, out into the parking lot, right? Then a few seconds later, he went and got her clothing, walked back with it, opened the door again, and shut it. Meanwhile, she was hammering there naked, pretty well, hammering at the door. This guy was notorious of sort of like any person causing any problems, noise or anything too much, right? So even no matter who they were, they didn't mess with this dude, right? Sort of thing like this. And him and 5 zillion others that I'd see of all these different crazy things, and not once did I ever see somebody think somebody was an alien, Bigfoot, or mistaken a human for an owl, or any of this kinds of stuff. So this is a complete sort of hogwashy sort of fancy, right, that has no basis in complete silliness. But this, when I was talking about this Newfoundland lady, her gimmick was she said she was the Irish princess, and she claimed she was some kind of ancient princess of some sort, and she would dress exactly like a leprechauness would, leprechauness, right? Like, as you can imagine what a leprechauness would be like, right? Which there's very few reports in history. I guess they hide from these leprechaun guys, don't want their pot of gold stolen. The ladies like to shop, right? So that could be very possible, but that sort of thing, right? But whatever the case, this one was the cutest and funniest sort of a woman, and a few times I had some drinks with her, and she was just magnificent. She had all kinds of stories and told me about her leprechaun sort of buddies out there and all this sort of stuff. But she would mooch free beers, the same thing. This is how she'd do it. She'd say, "I'm the Irish princess," and she'd be all this cute little sort of green sort of outfit here with short skirt and the whole sort of doing the fishnet stockings in green. I mean, how can you beat that? So these guys and even ladies would gobble this right up and sort of buy her free drinks, right? So I never seen her pay for a drink ever the few times that I was in this place. But the thing is again, none of these people were hallucinating and seeing sort of like, she was a good storyteller, but she wasn't actually hallucinating ever and sort of saying that she saw, you know what I mean, that I was turning into a leprechaun or anything, right? So bottom line, a lot of these Joe Nicholas like answers out there are really of no value because they don't fit into what's really occurring. And people that mention these things obviously either live in a delusional world or just cannot accept facts. or just want to ignore it, or just like being on the side of whatever. If somebody's the left, they want to be right. If they're right, they want to be left, right? So whatever it is, and they don't mind giving the most insane, silly, mundane answers because they know that at least 20% of the people out there is going to absorb this instantly just because this guy spoke. Right? Sort of stuff like this. But I mean, these sort of things are very interesting. That it's not feasible that that sort of occurs. Really, there could be a case or two or whatever, but it's very low. So these answers sort of don't apply, right? And that sort of way, and it's much more logical. From you have thousands of references from ancient ancestors since time began. Each one's telling you that somebody from the sky is visit. Their interpretations are always different, whatever. So I have no idea what God is, or if really God is an alien guy or whatever. These things doesn't matter. That we're just talking about the reality. Is there sort of some kind of life out there, and do they possibly influence us? And you can see through history all these sort of great leaders, like Joan of Arc was said to have this sword that she was mystically spoken to in dreams. Again, the same thing. All these guys, from the guy that built the rocket ship, Tesla, he said that he didn't give the ideas, that these people from the Pleiades spoke to him. So in that case, sometimes they would actually meet with these people. Maybe dreams isn't good enough to sort of get the process they want, so they have to explain better in person, whatever, right? Like some kind of methodology like that, right? Sort of thing like this. And it could be that since time began, we're influenced from behind the scenes. Maybe some world leaders know these things exist. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe only a certain elite do. Who knows? But a lot of answers they give are not practical. They do not fit, and they sound foolish. So any people that believe them, I think you're really just living in a imaginary world of forest smog. It's me who actually thinks you're delusional, right? Because you'll see that it's impossible. Even if one of these flying saucers that I'm going to show you, or any of this other stuff, is reality, then it has to be reality. There is something up in our skies that monitor and look at us, right? And these SETI to all these sort of things are a waste of time. And as of, for instance, the SETI thing, they've been sending out beams of, burrito toots out in outer space. And conveniently, they've set up a project that would be long enough to have you a pension and sort of keep a bunch of scientists with something to do, right? But the thing is, NASA was going to cut their funding completely off. If NASA sort of, why would NASA do that? They would do that since, I'll show you later, there's all kinds of photos and films from NASA of UFO-like things. What if it's very simple that they know that these guys monitor them? Or that they were even approached some of their sort of workers or whatever, an astronaut, whatever the case, right? And sort of stuff. So they got guaranteed proof now a long time ago that yes, aliens are actually out there. So there'd be no reason on Earth for these sort of SETI guys to exist, because they're ignoring your signals. They know you're sending signals. They can cloak, and they're sitting up there. So the NASA would realize this would be a waste of paying a bunch of people to do nothing, right? So then what do these guys do? They get private people to sort of invest in this. And a lot of sort of wealthy people are snooty, sort of, where they're going to sort of believe that they're the great mind, and they're going to listen to this guy and fully absorb what this great scientist guy is saying, and they think they're pro-intelligent and all this, and they're a deep thinker and all these sorts of stuff. So they'll buy this sort of idea, and then these guys probably, I wouldn't be surprised, pitch them that, yeah, if we ever do reach alien life, we'll make sure that you guys are the first ones to get any sort of deals of trade or anything, right? Who knows how they pitched them to sort of get them, convince some person to actually invest millions of dollars to pay some idiot to send a fart gas out into outer space. I find absolutely bizarre. But anyways, the audacity of people to actually believe that I mean, that you actually really believe that, yeah, there is life out there, but that they're too stupid to have reached here, when you have tens of thousands and thousands of references for over 10,000 years from every culture on the planet, all describing you flying rocks in the sky, flying chariots, flying columns of fire, all these sorts of stuff. And I can even prove that that's exactly what they're talking about in aircraft. One of the earliest sort of people that you can find is a Japanese emperor. And what this guy did is he actually commissioned sort of, because he saw this flying chariot in the sky and he wanted one. So he got his best sort of genius guy of the sort of region that was his sort of builder and stuff, to commission him to make him a flying machine. Apparently this guy was successful and was actually able to sort of mimic some of their stuff and was able to actually fly. Whatever happened to this thing, I have no idea. But the point is that this guy here, he calls it a flying chariot, and he's commissioning a man to make a flying chariot that you can ride in so the emperor could ride around in it. That 100% guarantees and correlates 1,000,000% that the term flying chariot actually really means a flying saucer like ship like airplane-ish, like anything that can fly and maneuver by sort of a human or alien like control where it's mechanical, right? So this is the thing here, is that it guarantees that this terminology was being used. And so the same thing, flying dragons, I got an ancient depiction you can find on one of the other shows. They say that they mentioned that the same emperor cleared the real dragons out of the field, giant lizards, terrible lizards, dragons, dinosaurs, right? Whatever, different sorts of them. But that this guy flew around in a giant rock. And when he would leave the giant rock, he came out in a smaller ship that looked like a golden gleaming dragon. Okay? And again, they're using the terminology because they know that the locals know what a dragon is and that they fly and stuff like this. So it's the best sort of one you can find, except they're clearly making this not a real dragon. They're making it a one that's a machinery of some sort, because they say the guy climbs into it and rides on it. They describe it being made of gold or stuff like this. And usually in a lot of these ones, they actually say bronze and brass or different things that you can correlate that he's not actually talking about. There's thousands of accounts where they're actually talking about a regular dragon where they're fighting with him and stuff, but there's also these sort of ones where they're using the dragon to a floating cloud, a burning bush, whatever, as these terminologies to describe a spaceship-like sort of thing up in the sky, right? So this is a sort of a fascinating thing where you can guarantee that even the biblical sort of thing, that's probably what, much more likely, that's what it meant. It says, the Lord has thousands of chariots and he sits in amongst them, sounding like a bigger chariot, right? Sort of thing like this. And because you can prove in ancient times, even before sort of like this sort of like nobody really knows exactly. The Bible was only compiled fully until about the 15th century. Before that, it was sort of, there was way more chapters to it and things been removed and all kinds of stuff. But none of them argue with each other, really. It's just that they didn't feel comfortable with some of the stuff they mentioned about stuff like reincarnation and all kinds of weird stuff in there that, for whatever reason, these church guys decided to remove some of it, right? So, but the point is that these different books are considered all accurate, and these sort of stuff, and everything from Ezekiel, where the mighty being brings him up in a flying chariot, sort of, right? He teaches them language and all kinds of stuff like this. You have the same thing with these early sort of ones. In one of their depictions, you see the gleaming dragon flying down to Earth, but inside of it, they actually have a spaceship, indicating clearly that's what they were talking about. You wouldn't have drawn a spaceship inside of it. I mean, it's completely a flying saucer. It's nothing else. It's the exact shape of a flying saucer. You can clearly tell this, and what they're trying to really describe is that it flies like a burning sort of dragon wood sort of idea, right? So you have all these correlations of literally all this, and millions of witnesses still up today that have seen UFOs around the world, tens of thousands of films. So how a SETI guy could say there's not a single shred of evidence for any of these people, I really believe these guys are living in a delusional sort of world. That's right. And even NASA must know they exist. and sort of that's why they wouldn't fund such a thing. Again, there's no reason to pay somebody to send out burrito gas when obviously they're hiding and cloaking, or they're already approaching some of your citizens, right? It's a thing like this. But anyways, we'll continue on here. But here, this UFO early history here. You get 1034, a strange craft was seen going in a straight path, described as a fiery spear in Germany in a book called Libra Chronicarum. And there's a depiction of it. It's floating up in the skies there and stuff like that. So absolutely fascinating. I like how the guy did it. A great sort of a good little architectural sort of a piece there, and sort of he's got all this sort of quite intricate sort of stuff like that. And so I love these old artworks and things like that because they depict so many things that science claims this and that, yet they actually have on the map already sort of they already have on the maps creatures that supposedly weren't discovered for massive hundreds of years later, yet they fully have them described and actually warn you of them being in the area, not to sort of stuff like this. But instead, people will ignore factual things in museums all over the place because it doesn't fit in with their Darwinism sort of mentality, right? And I say that it doesn't matter one way or the other, whether you want to believe in a biblical one or a Darwinism type of way. It still would have no relevance whether or not alien life could exist on another planet, or that they could sort of mess with us from behind the scenes. I mean, one would have nothing to do with the other, really. So one way or the other, it wouldn't matter how we were created, how many millions of years or thousands of years we've been here, or anything. The bottom line is that still, for sure, when you have trillions of stars out in the skies here, and sort of idea that it would be very feasible that there'd have to be other sort of life forms. Back in the 60s, this psychic kid there, he's sort of already in class, was telling people that he could see that there was things way faster than light. And finally, there's some scientific people out there that show that these eggheads, were really close-minded, and they haven't even discovered 1/10 of what's really out there yet of any sort of thing, and that they just believe people absorb theories. But there's now science out there that they've tested things where they think that this thing can go 0.5 times faster than light. So this is what you've now captured here. It could be that there's thousands of times faster than light, as far as you know. So then all this sort of interstellar flight stuff that you think would take ever might take a very short time. And because you're being closed-minded, you're sort of thinking that we know everything, that advancement and sort of thing like that. But really, we might be chimpanzees compared to these sort of other advanced races. And the Einstein that you're listening to would be considered lower IQ than a slug compared to what a human would be, like in our sort of terms, right? Sort of thing like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear that, and especially the mommy doesn't want to hear that her kid isn't really as bright as she thinks he is. But these are the facts. I mean, and intelligence is very different. I mean, a Bigfoot is much more intelligent in his terrain than sort of the Joes walking out in the forest looking for him, or the Bubbas or anybody else, right? Because these guys live in their terrain 24 hours a day. They've learned from their mistakes all kinds of stuff, and they pass it on to their sort of kin. These ape people, if they're wild apes or if they're humans, or both exist sort of types, they still have the same methodology and will be able to sort of evade you. They probably have adapted to nightlife lifestyles in some areas and sort of things like this, and have a very different sort of, because they're familiar with their background and they're much more intelligent on their terrain than you are going to be, because you don't have the experience. So again, each thing what you might consider intelligent is sort of, you're actually primitive. Like a Sheldon guy is extremely primitive when it comes to the fact that if you put him outside of out in the wilderness, and this guy's only sort of made nuclear fusion before, and now he has to survive out in the wilderness, and he has never even set a teepee bonfire yet or anything like this. Well, then obviously this guy is going to die and shrivel up there, no matter how intelligent he is, quite quickly, right? So this is the thing: is that there's this pompous sort of stuff here where people give people like this some kind of extra godlike sort of thing, like as if their wisdom is the greatest and everybody else's is foolish. We must listen to them because they were tested and they have a high IQ. This is gobbledygook, again, because they only can go by what they've seen or their sort of thought processes are on something. But they might not have the backing of what they're saying at all, but they just are going to believe this because I'm amazing, I'm great. Who wouldn't? I must be right. Right? And this is sort of the mentality of a lot of these sort of people like this. Like, I mean, through history, I mean, look at the wreckage of this Darwinism thing. How much society is sort of sunk into terrible sort of things because of these sorts of divisions and amongst sort of people, and everybody's a skeptic, and nobody believes in a possibility of a this or that anymore. These churches are shut down by the tons all over the place and sort of stuff like this because they're way less in numbers because they've been preached so much in schools, so much in their university teachings and everything else, and tried to be falsely educated, believing in theories that sounds so good that you must be an idiot to believe that there'd be a possibility of another sort of theory out there that could explain these sort of things. But the reality is there's actually thousands and thousands and thousands, I mean, upon thousands of people with scientific degrees that fully disagree about the age of the Earth, the testing of fossilizations, to UFOs living in our sky. So there's all kinds of intelligent people that on paper have extremely high IQs that agree fully with these sort of premises that yes, there probably is intelligent life in the skies. Yes, it would be wouldn't be surprised at all that it'd be possible that they could sort of cloak amongst us and this sort of thing like this. And yes, it's quite feasible that there could be wild people out in the forest or an ape or two we haven't discovered and this sort of thing like this. I mean, just in recent years, everything from a new orangutan, which is the same size of a human pretty well here, and sort of stuff like this. So all these creatures can evade you. This is just another year or two has gone by. The same thing could apply. The better that they are at it and the more sort of adapt to their sort of system, the much more intelligent they are about their system and can evade others that do not have this sort of knowledge that is required. Yeah, maybe the scientist guy can learn this quicker than an average person once you show him how it works and he can sort of investigate and see with his own hands or eyes or whatever it is, how he sort of absorbs information. He sort of that guy then might be able to pick up something fairly quicker, sort of than some of the average, some guy sitting in the backwoods chewing on a piece of straw sort of thing. But that doesn't matter. He still doesn't have this information. Therefore, he's not knowledgeable about anything. And so when he's talking silly, saying there couldn't be a monster in the forest and stuff, the guy's actually not been there. Any idiot that says that these sorts of couldn't be or this and that, these are idiotic sort of statements. I mean, I've been through all BC. I was lost 9 hours once out around Kelowna, for crying out loud. 9 hours in the wilderness. We could not find an exit road to get out of there. Okay, so the forests are mind-boggling. You can have mountains of wild people living right beside you, and you wouldn't see them. Back in the 70s, and when was it, in California or something, some guy wobbled out. He was some part of some ancient tribe and sort of stuff like this. There was another guy in sort of a There was another guy over in South America, the same thing. The guy had no idea this tribe that these people were all living beside them, right? It's very sort of feasible, these sort of things. So whether the guy's hairy or not, he still might have human-like intelligence. And in their world, they're much more intelligent than you are in that same world, right? So that's the thing is, until you get the knowledge and the experience in that particular thing, I don't think any of these people should be sort of so skeptical like that, because they're not really there and they're not doing these things. You sort of have to look at the whole scope of stuff. What's the feasibility, right, of different things like this? And you got millions of sightings, or that every single person hallucinated. It's much more likely the millions of sightings are correct, right? So, here's some more early UFO history here. In 1697, two globes were witnessed in Germany. So, there's an early sort of, and there's a depiction of it. Quite sort of interesting. This one here, 1566, Basel, Switzerland. Spears appeared at daybreak and then vanished, being fiery red. And there was their depiction. They used to put these in actually early newspapers, one of the earliest newspapers around, and reports like that. I find this one extremely credible. There was this battle over Nuremberg, Germany, and one of them actually crashed. Here's what I suspect. A lot of people would say, well, yeah, why don't they tear it up? Of course, they're not going to do that. Somebody owns that land and all that sort of stuff. But I highly suspect in the past that here's what sort of happened with any sort of crashes that might have occurred. Think about it. You're a local group. You're watching this battle in the sky. So now one of these UFO-like things, which you have no idea, especially then, you're even more sort of primitive about the subject. So you're scared of whatever this sort of thing is, this God sort of beagle. What is it? Like, what's going on here? So right away, they would sort of, only the most brazen and sort of characters would even go near the thing. Most would sort of back off from it and let's wait and see what happens. Does anybody come out of the ship? This and that. So let's say nothing happens over time, and then it starts weeds growing on it, stuff like that. People start getting more brazen. All of a sudden now there's all this metal around that could be used to forge this, that, and this. This stuff would have been used as scrap metal. And they would have started taking the parts and sort of stuff like this, and within several decades or even a year or maybe a month, who knows, like depending on the sort of situation, the locals would have sort of made this stuff vanish. You find this, there's a fascinating tale about this early godlike guy that had crashed in a ship around Crete. And this guy sort of started building these robots, apparently, I guess, to help fix his ship of some sort or whatever, right? And he created this one giant robot. And it's fascinating. They're describing mechanical cogs and how the thing works. It seems extremely advanced to be all imagination sort of thing. And so, anyways, let's say this is actually true, that this guy had the knowledge. Of course, he's some alien dude. So he opened up some kind of smelting there. And of course, if you're a big alien guy with magic equipment on you that might have survived in the ship, I'd imagine the people are going to listen to you fairly quickly, sort of thing, right? So this guy was able to sort of, he made this one giant robot, and it would actually walk around the island and patrol. And if anybody tried to land on it, this thing would wade out in the water and crush their ships. I actually believe this story is true, because they said that, this is interesting, that finally this thing died out. It stopped moving. And then all of a sudden they mentioned this, that people start looking around this sort of thing like this. They started taking the parts. Exactly what sort of I kind of believe that this would be feasible in some of these sort of ones where they report this UFO crash. It could be that the early sort of citizens might have, over time, finally had enough brazen nerve to sort of looking at it, sort of thing like that. And then they sort of would realize these are sort of great metal parts. Of course, they wouldn't have the advancement of science and the different things, or the foreknowledge to bring this down to some early scientist guy to look at it. Probably not. Instead, they just whipped it in their smelting sort of stuff, right? So any local guy that would make sort of swords to everything else, this is free metal. I mean, who wouldn't love that, right? Sort of idea like that. So that would be very feasible, that some of these sort of stuff might have been sort of taken down by by early sort of things like that, and that's why you wouldn't find some of this evidence much of sort of alien-like sort of stuff laying around. In 1492, Columbus saw two glowing orbs appear following along him. Interestingly, it seemed like he was sort of following along with them, and all of a sudden he landed by accident pretty well on the shores of America, right? So did they influence him again? Is it possible that without our knowledge, through dreams, through certain things that they do by appearing in the skies or whatever, it causes a certain influence on certain individuals to do certain things, and then this gets their agenda done of whatever it might be, right? Here in 1904, this naval ship, the USS Supply, witnessed one large ship the size of 3 suns that was egg-shaped, along with 2 others that were much smaller, dish-shaped, climbing into the skies. So I would say people on a sort of Navy that are used to sort of, they're looking around for war-like things, enemies, all that sort of stuff. These guys would be meticulous sort of witnesses, just like ski captains looking for pirates and all this. So when they watch a sea serpent for 2 hours, I don't believe that they saw a whale, right? Because these guys see whales day and night. So again, the silly skeptical answers do not apply with such people like that. They're either outright lying, or they actually really could not have hallucinated or mistaken it for a whale like most of them claim. And the same thing would apply with these ships or any of this other sort of thing like this, where you have this sort of, it's not feasible that, that would have occurred, that they would have been that sort of mistaken, that your mistaken floating craft, you know what I mean, for a comet and stuff like this. It's not very feasible, because they should be better witnesses than that. So we're going to talk about next, to corroborate with this sort of stuff here, about plagues that these aliens may actually call us from time to time. Now, think about this. Several years ago, before the corona ever started, there was already in hospital records of way before that was tipped off to governments that there was some kind of mysterious disease in the hospital going on. Every time they get something weird, they have to report to some kind of government agency. At least most of them do. Interestingly, all of a sudden, your crooked politicians and all kinds of them got rid of their stocks and started investing in masks and other sort of terror-like paraphernalia that they use with this corona stuff. Interestingly, this same sort of things applies for over 400 years from it started around the 11th century and went on for at least over 400 years. This Black Plague sort of at this same sort of time, every place from all over reports seeing things in the sky shooting a mist down upon them, a mist going through the town, or people dressed like Grim Reapers that would come out of flying ships, sometimes with magical flying horses and stuff, and they would come in and spread noxious gas through the wheat fields or go into towns, knocking on people's doors and only killing some but leaving others alone, right? So extremely fascinating. So a sort of thing like this. So again, is it feasible that once we get to certain levels, the experiment's no good anymore? There's too many, too many sort of people out there. There's too much warring going on, too much this and that, where the earth cannot sustain itself. The animals are dying out, and they're also experimenting on them, and this sort of, and all these sorts of stuff. Every single creature, I'd imagine, that's on this planet, these guys probably sort of look at them of some sort and probably analyze this, would sort of make sense with these cow mutilations and all these weird sort of stuff that's out there. This could be very feasible that they sort of behind the scenes. And I know a lot of skeptics say, well, why would somebody do that? Why wouldn't they do that? Our scientists would do that. Many people, including myself, I mean, if I went over sort of into a lake and all of a sudden I seen these giant bass that were like 500 pounds. They were some kind of sort of a new species that had sort of evolved from Micropter samoyedi or something, right? So now I see these giant ones. I'd be in there day and night watching these dudes. I'd be trying every sort of lure presentation on them. I'd want to see if they hunt up on the surface in the moonlit night. Do they do this and that? Are they active at night? Are they, how many bowel movements they have? It wouldn't matter. I'd want to know these things too because I'm a fish nut and I want to know all this sort of information. They little intricate sort of things, whatever it would be. So it would make 100% sense to me that a logical society in some other places would want to do the same sort of behavior, except they consider us chimp-like. We don't want to hear that because, again, mommy told us we were intelligent, but I mean, we might not be that smart compared to what's out there, right? So sort of things like this. And when he says he made us in his own image, if that version is correct, some kind of mighty entity that created us of some sort, even at that, he's still watching us as an experiment. He wants to see how we're going to behave and do these different sort of procedures, right? So this would all make sort of perfect sense. It would also make perfect sense that whatever is supposedly good, there would also be bad versions, and it could be that a lot of sort of things out there, some of these ships are not having your best interests and may actually be experimenting on people for different reasons or weird sort of stuff like this. Also, though, it could be humans in a lot of cases that use hypnotic-like sort of stuff here, where a government does this for some kind of secret testing and things like this, where they can't because, like, let's say it's an experiment that you want to turn humans into some kind of hybrid chimp man, right? You can't put that out in the public. They're not going to like this, and they're going to boycott it, and they're going to do this and that and that. So your agency has to be funded secretly through some other government loophole, and you can't really exist, just like a Men in Black sort of thing. And you need to get body parts and the different things that you need to do the experiments. There was cases here in the United States there where it was proven the government actually sprayed in Agent Orange like stuff over these black neighborhoods because they found that the least, according to them, collateral sort of damage. I mean, aren't they wonderful human beings, right? Whatever lowlifes did that. I mean, all of those people should be put in on that True Glow spanking machine around the clock, man. Because that's exactly what any lowlifes that would do that and spray upon their citizens. I mean, just because the guys, I mean, what a lowlife. So whatever government agency did that is the scum of the earth. Like, I mean, absolutely. Whatever people ran that at that time, all of those people, hopefully there is a hell and hopefully they're sitting in it. Because, I mean, that's the most atrocious sort of stuff here, to treat other humans like this, like we're some kind of chimpanzee. But it may be in some higher culture like this, maybe that's what they actually do with us, right? And it could be that there's bad ones out there doing this sort of things like that as well. All I can tell you is this much. They blame sort of this black plague on rat infestation, yet it's not feasible where a Chinese rat could start off in Japan and then all of a sudden now he's poisoning somebody in some middle village in England, right? It's not feasible, that sort of stuff. Yeah, some of them could have spread where the guy's doing trade and one jumps on a wagon and then goes to another one, sort of thing like that, and all that sort of thing. That would be very feasible, a few of them. But almost none of these cases they mention any rat infestations, but every case they mention a mystical mist that comes through the air. Conveniently, even in China, there's such a thing nowadays where children will all get affected, their tongues will all turn with these blisters on them and stuff, and every time all of them get sick instantly around the same time, and this weird smog-like stuff envelops them. Right? So, and this has actually even occurred in the United States. So what if these sort of, as well, governments might do, sort of secret governments might do experiments on certain groups out there, or that aliens from behind the scenes that puppet these people tell them to do this, and they don't want to do it for whatever reason. Maybe they have to make themselves more visible or whatever, right? So who knows, like some kind of weird thing. But I would imagine that any scientific, like sort of high intelligent minds from another place would fully want to see what we do under all circumstances, and would be like a giant TV show that they could review, sort of thing like that. So I wouldn't be surprised. And but the thing is that what's interesting is this black plague all of a sudden vanished. The swine flu, the same thing, people dropping like flies all around you, it vanishes. This time I'm concerned that it may not, because in ancient times, the most average people were not as advanced yet, and like not everybody had a petri dish with them and all this sort of thing like this. But any person now, even a Bubba retard sitting in the sitting on his roof, drinking Pabst 24 hours a day, sort of thing like this, and the guy's got an IQ of 60, still probably could sort of figure out what a petri dish is, probably grab a sort of a mongoose that lives down the street and say whatever, right? Kill him and then drop his blood in there, mix it with some other wacky thing, and see what happens, right? Any sort of nuts out there could sort of do this sort of behavior, and it could be that now that these companies and stuff see that how easy it is to cause bankruptcy, to cause businesses to shut down, to cause your leaders to panic, to cause this, that, you're going to want to keep this action going to make money for your companies. So these things might mysteriously keep appearing, and they'll have to come up with new sort of vaccines consistently. And don't think these things aren't possible. There was all kinds of big famous companies. Well, one of them will mention, they say, a family company, right? Well, that's one of their slogans, right? Sort of thing like this. These guys drop millions of needles on beaches in poor sort of areas in South America and different places, full of raids to gonorrhea and everything, all this sort of stuff. And they only got a small little slap in the hand fine, yet they purposely were trying to murder literally thousands of people that would go on the beaches because they didn't want to pay for the disposal of it. Right. So these are the kinds of sort of evil, sort of greedy, like sort of stuff here. And it could be that there is evil aliens that sort of control people like this and sort of help them by giving them sort of tips and how to sort of conquer more and to do this and that. So both sides could actually apply. This would make sort of common sense too. In any sort of great sort of cultures, there's good and sort of evil of any sort of thing, right? So that, and your perception of what's evil and good may be very different from one person to the next, right? So that's another sort of thing. So even this mighty being that we might perceive as good on the good side, he may do certain things that others would be perceived as being not really very nice or whatever, right? Sort of thing like that. So it's very sort of depending on the individuals, what your interpretation of good and evil really is, right? So that sort of thing. So just another sort of thing, but interesting. It just seems that every time we've gotten too large, or certain groups have invaded us, like in past the Ottoman Empire sort of thing, and all these different ones where the Muslims ran nearly the planet at one point and stuff like this. These other sort of people got tired of this, and it could be that they wanted it this way, so they sort of helped these much lesser numbers sort of people take over and throw all these characters out from different areas and take back their lands, right? So the same thing would apply, that depending on what these guys want and what the experiment is, whose side are they on, who's not. So maybe one year they might actually be on, let's say they're on the Muslim side on this planet because they want them to control a certain thing. Maybe the next time they turn and do something else, right? So it's very sort of like this, where it's we may perceive things as good and evil and who's righteous, who isn't, but it could be their advanced sort of knowledge here. They're doing this for a reason. There is no good or bad. It's to see what occurs under each situation, whether it might be bad, negative to the people, or positive to them, right? Again, any scientists with a brain would also test these kinds of things. I know I certainly would. Any sort of person, I certainly don't think I'm going to couldn't be more full of faults, that sort of thing. But the thing is that I realize that any sort of great entity, probably. I mean, just if average people would sort of, if they analyze all the kinds of stuff, they would be curious about all kinds of stuff. The same thing would apply with that. And they certainly wouldn't want you knowing that you're observing them, because when you observe people, they behave different. If they know you're there, they're going to behave very different than if they don't know you're there. And that's the sort of thing, right? And sort of stuff like this. So you have to keep these things in mind. It's much more complicated. It's not a the SETI sort of world here. It's not as simple as that, right? Sort of thing like this. So here's some early UFO history here with the way before the Wright brothers. I mean, I got sort of paintings on one of my other sort of shows there way back from over 1,000 years ago, and it shows a whole army pointing up to a flying ship. It's definitely a flying ship. It's got wings on it. It's got smoke shooting out of it, a power source, all kinds of stuff like this. How anybody claims that, these guys were the first ones flying around is silly. It's the most outrageous lie and sort of historical inaccuracy you could possibly imagine. There was all kinds of people flying around before them. A sort of thing like this Aero Cruiser. This guy was making like a giant Noah Ark here. You could put like 10 zillion things in there. You could have bars in there and the whole do, eh? Sort of stuff like this, right? But this early one here was, they had tested it. It actually was able to fly. That's what they claimed and stuff like this. And this thing was run with a 60 horsepower motor, and it was designed after a bee. And the wings would flap and sort of shoot along like this. And there was all kinds of people that were inventing sort of early flying machines. There's a report of this that looked like a car, and these humans sort of smashed in where their car crashed, but it flew from the skies and sort of things like this. But it looked like a car, and it had these sort of weird wings on it. But they weren't aliens. They were regular sort of human beings, and they actually spoke to people and said, oh, they were testing out their machine. Right, so way before, like I said, the Wright brothers, there's all kinds of ones like that. So those guys were great. They were trying their own thing, but they actually got their ideas from previous sort of people, just like Bill with the telephone. I mean, Christians were doing that thousands of years ago. They burrowed small little holes and pipelines all through their mountains, and they would warn if the Romans or different enemies were coming. The guy would just speak into it, and over a mile and a half away, the people could hear in the different rooms and have a conversation with them back and forth. Some, the sound would shoot this way, the other sound would shoot that way, right? Sort of thing. Exactly very similar, like sort of a telephone-ish like sort of idea, right? So there's been all kinds of stuff like that. No matter what you see in history, you've been taught that you're the big genius of today. Sorry, you copied the idea because some guy found it in an ancient manuscript somewhere when he was reading someplace, and he adapted it to the modern technologies that was known around at the time that improve or advance on it. And that's all. Almost every idea you can humanly think of, from grenades, early sort of mine bombs, all these stuff the U.S. completely took from the Japanese and Chinese. There was emperors thousands of years ago that would make mine bombs. They would lay them out in the roads. The other invading armies would come and blow the crap right out of them, sort of thing like this, right? Early sort of how they build inside the pyramids, guaranteed they had a light source. It's impossible. There's no scorching in any of these rooms. You can't see anything. It's impossible that it was done by fire, sort of stuff like that. So you're expected to believe that people can get a millionth of an inch perfect accuracy and all this sort of stuff with that. Yet on their walls, you see clearly that they're holding a lamp-like device on one of them, where it's seemingly powered by a bunch of batteries, which they call these Baghdad Batteries. Scientists claim that they must have been used for smelting, but that's just a supposition. I mean, they have no sort of evidence to back this, and it's very feasible that in early times this was an artificial light sort of source. So certainly Edison wasn't the first one to think up these kind of ideas either. All this sort of stuff has been done way before. There was mechanical robots thousands of years ago One king, the guy would actually sort of have his sort of these robotic lions that would sort of walk down this sort of pathway and for the whole audience, and then turn around and give them a roar. And it was completely made of all these mechanical parts and sort of like a silver metal sort of lions here, sort of thing like that. There was early mentions of early robots and sort of stuff. There was some really genius people in early times. The first sort of coin machine, this guy was a genius. He invented this sort of a coin machine where you'd put the coin in, the lever would make the wine drip out, and then or drop a sort of a little biscuit that for the Christianity, early Christianity sort of things. And the church guys actually bought these machines off of this guy, because instead, each one, instead of having to give a donation, they would have to purchase a sip of wine and a thing like this by putting in the coin. So this started making the church mucho dinero, right? And this sort of thing like this. So this guy was a genius. He early clocks, all kinds of. There's that device that was found in a ship in the 1700s that, you know what I mean, is way beyond advancement of anything supposedly that we do, and all this sort of stuff. There's ancient wall depictions you can find of all kinds of people riding bicycles. It's 100% with the same spokes, the same wheels, same everything. So all these things were lost in the past through cataclysms, floods. The people that knew the secrets died out and might have been approached and again affected by alien sort of things in the background, giving them sort of information and dreams in some kind of way, influencing them because they want to see what the experiment is. Like maybe back then they said, I wonder, we'll give this guy we'll help him out here to invent an early bicycle because we need this guy to be able to deliver goods better, to save some guy over here that needs food because one day we're going to use him to build a ship or something. Who knows? Like some kind of weirdo methodology where the guy's got a whole sort of process planned out and they know this individual can do this, that, and that. So they sort of give ideas in the mind by some kind of thing like that. Or somehow pick individuals because they know they're going to think like this and will get the job done. Whatever. But I mean, there's been flying machines and all kinds of stuff, and guaranteed that somebody out there sort of from behind the scenes probably influences these things. Like here way before the Wright brothers, 1915 in as sort of what way earlier here, you can see these ones. You can clearly see these guys are flying in the sky. So why they give claims and saying they were the first successful flight? They flew. They're flying. I mean, I can clearly see they're up in the air and they're right. So even if the guy only went 500 yards, all they did is just tweaked on the design to finally get it right. Right. So I mean, they didn't sort of do that. Right. So I'm an historic person. I'm going to give credit to where it actually belongs. Right. Sort of thing like that. I still think they were great and a wonderful sort of thing and all that sort of stuff, but their idea isn't new, and the word aeroplane was around for about 100 years earlier at least than what these guys even existed. So like, I mean, that's sort of another sort of thing too, where there was people already doing this for quite some time, and some of them supposedly successful, that just wasn't recorded properly, sort of thing. In 1868 in Findlay, Ohio, I love this. This is one of the weirdest UFOs ever, probably in history. This weird hand-like sort of UFO, and it looked like it had 5 fingers. One of the fingers pointed at the town, and this mysterious blood-like substance kept dripping out of it. Now, a lot of people would think that that must be a mass hallucination, but I suggest something different. In many, many films you can even find of today of UFOs, sometimes there's this weird red noxious gas that comes out of some of them. You can actually see these on film. So what if it's feasible that this particular craft just happened to look a little bit handish-like? It seems they make many kinds of crafts, so they might experiment on all kinds of different ones. And it could be that this finger-like thing they were seeing was actually just this thing spreading some noxious gas or releasing gas that they need to for some reason. Maybe they have to do this occasionally. It builds up in the ship or whatever, right? Some kind of methodology like that. But I love this sort of a sighting. I think it's a fascinating one and very interesting. I mean, it's so crazy that it's not likely sort of hallucination. there probably is much more likely it's too weird to make up. That's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, for a whole town to back this up, that they all saw this, and all of them to describe it as a giant hand in the sky seems extremely sort of not likely it could be mass hallucination sort of thing. So I would suspect that maybe it was a ship of some sort, but just happened to look handish like, and they would of course think this red ooze that's coming out of there is blood, or it's possible that they actually maybe what can sort of use some kind of thing like this, like a ship-like thing where it can, because you see a lot of ships, they can change shape seemingly, some of them, and weird stuff. So maybe they, out of curiosity or comedy or something, they just wanted to see what a big religious group might think if some giant hands from the sky out there giving you a sign with some blood coming out of it, sort of thing like that, to freak you out or something, to see how you might react to such a thing. I suppose that'd be possible too. But whatever the case, it seems more likely it couldn't be a mass hallucination. And if even one of those people were telling the truth, it sounds like a pretty weird UFO. Right. But here's what I was saying, how these aliens may be using very powerful, wealthy people to sort of get their agenda done from behind the scenes. Here, like, interesting, like the DuPont, I mean, there's sort of responsibility for, like, especially me, an angler, right? I mean, these guys are my heroes when it comes to the monofilament creation, right? And things like this. I mean, a zillion times better than the old lines of previous, much more invisible, much more better. I still find it way better than sort of braids. It's way better than fluorocarbon or any of them, even though fluorocarbon's a little bit more invisible. It's certainly not invisible. And as monofilament has all the right sort of properties most of the time to get much more successful fishing most of the time. Sort of thing like this. But this UFO was hovering over early 1900s, right over the DuPont plant. And you notice this through history, everything from sort of army bases to nuclear testing facilities, wealthy sort of people, big plants, churches as well, sort of things of interest where it seems that. So what if some of these ideas that they wanted, maybe they wanted fishing line out there for 10 million people to go fishing or something, right, to explore the outdoors. There might be a plan for that. So they give them the knowledge somehow without them realizing it. They send like beams into the inventor's mind down in there. This guy all of a sudden gets an idea or discovers something, right? And this sort of stuff. So they could do this behind the scenes. You would be all impressed with yourself thinking you're the great genius, but really you got this idea from somebody else, right? So I know a lot of people wouldn't like to hear that, but I mean, it just, the correlation of these UFOs over these and how they always seem to be interested in more wealthier, the powerful, all that sort of stuff like that. There is a correlation because, of course, who are you going to pick? Like, I mean, you're an alien sort of thing, and now it would be a lot easier to approach a billionaire because the guy is the type that has the money and the resources that you need to get your agenda done, and you help him by giving him tips and things with your advancements and secret sort of things that you wouldn't share with the regular sort of citizens. And this guy profits from this. So, of course, he's your, most loving ally sort of idea, right? And this would be a very logical that, I mean, they would do that. It's not, they might pick Fred the Wino occasionally to do something or other, but a lot of times, if it's needed for the big scope of plan, they might use more people that they can use their resources to their advantage, right? So stuff like this. So here's some early UFOs. Here, 1870s. This was shot in Washington. You can clearly see it's a solid object. This one here, 1920s, Photo USA. You can see this not a plane, and it's hovering there. Look at the size of the corn, eh? Quite the chow down there. I'm sure if a Bigfoot was running by in that sort of area, he'd be have lots of chow there for a while. Sort of thing, But I love this. This is one of the most fascinating sort of photos ever in history of sort of this guy back in the 1930s. He was sort of this guy out in Switzerland. This is this ice fields. This guy was hidden around this sort of thing, and he saw this spaceship coming. So he starts taking pictures of them. This alien actually lands. Now, look at the size of this spaceship to the mountains. There is no way some guy was able to create some machinery that he dragged up by himself because there was nobody else with this dude. So you would have thought that somebody would have all this time would have said, "Oh yeah, we helped them with the giant flying garbage can or whatever," right? None of this sort of stuff occurs. They checked the original negatives; they weren't tampered with. This guy got no real money here for doing this. So my question is, how do you get this spaceship to fly up in there? It wasn't tampered with, so it's not CGI like sort of stuff here or Photoshop. This is a very giant vehicle here. It's the size partially of a mountain here, where it's quite big, sort of the base of this. You can perfectly see it's extremely well designed. It's certainly not a garbage can or any other sort of normal ones I could think of, and it's got a sort of a very sort of intricate design there. You can see the same levels from one to the next, sort of a thing like this. And compared to the alien, compared to this ship, it has to be fairly decent size. So again, it's not a balloon or some other weird sort of thing here. This is sort of very interesting, right? And is this robots that they use, some of them, like, or is that guy in some kind of hazmat like suit sort of thing? But very few people talk about this one, but I find it one of the most credible ones ever, and it gives me living creeps that this sort of alien thing is out there, sort of, because all I can tell you is that it's impossible that some guy was able to drag up some kind of thing he created here. It's like so slim. Like, I mean, you can see the UFOs coming down at an angle that all of a sudden he flattens himself out. A frisbee wouldn't be able to do that, or any of these kinds of stuff, right? Now it sort of lowers itself. You can see it's very well positioned there. There's no, like, I mean, if this thing was coming at an angle, let's say you shot a giant 100-foot long frisbee up in the air. Okay, so now it's up in the air and it's coming back down. You can see the angle on it. It would have hit and exploded into the sands here. You would have seen puffs of sand all over the place, the different sort of thing like this. But yet it looks like this thing actually just perfectly land. There's nothing really much disturbed here of the ground around it. And sort of, and he's on this side of this ice field. So you would have thought icy stuff would have, not sand or whatever, but the ice would have flown up in the sort of air here and all that sort of thing. You would have thought there'd be some kind of little hole there where it had landed on this angle, but you don't see that. It's very level sort of thing. And this guy comes out of this sort of ship here. And I mean, he's extremely creepy, right? So I'm a fan of this one. I don't believe that some guy for $10 in a newspaper. It was never talked about much. Again, it was covered in a few early UFO books in the 60s, investigated, and they found it was correct. It wasn't tampered with and that sort of thing. So what are you supposed to say here? So I think this guy was one of the luckiest people on this planet where he actually was able to photograph a real sort of alien-like sort of thing here. So I love that one. It's very convincing to me compared to a lot of them. Here in 1932, this George Sutton, they had found this later in this sort of, when they were looking at it another time, they didn't even realize there was a UFO monitoring them in the background. Here's 67 St. Luis Obispo, California. You can see it there quite clearly. It's definitely not a plane or anything like that. Looks quite decent size. Certainly way too high up in the air to shoot a garbage can or a frisbee to take a picture of. So, you know, here in this 1920s one, you can see it's way up in the distance, way high up in the skies. Certainly, again, the same thing. It wouldn't be sort of feasible, that sort of thing like that. And it was by a volunteer fireman. The guy was quite serious, tested authentic, right? Here, 1942, you can see the guy even pointing up at the UFO. I mean, really, I mean, that's pretty clear, right? I mean, that's a very unusual. It's a floating object there. It's hovering. We're not supposed to have aircraft at this time, sort of thing, right? And this was in Hope in China, right? So very interesting. Here, this one, Gordon Cooper, one of the test pilots, had gotten one of these shots here, and he had seen several others of his workers that was with him, whatever, that had actually filmed the UFO, but they gave that evidence to their superiors, and it was never seen the light of day. But this one sort of escaped out under the scrutinization, and you can see the UFO where the arrow's pointing there, so very interesting. Here, this one, Vancouver City Hall, 21-year-old Army man took this photo in 37 when the new building erected. And again, here's this interest with this buildings or what floating over farmers or weird stuff. And those must be boring jobs, but probably certain aliens are or an angel or whatever they may be, whatever you want to call them, they may sort of actually be sort of like certain jobs that they're assigned to as to study everything of this sort of stuff, and this kind of architecture like that might be fascinating to them, that's seeing us that we're advancing or whatever, or possibly maybe they gave the ideas to somebody, whatever, right? And they wanted to see how it worked out. Do they follow instructions well? That sort of idea. Here, this one, 1956, a meteorologist showing likely she would know what a meteor is. One idiot tried to say it was a meteor. I mean, that doesn't look like a meteor to me. But this was in Natal, South Africa. And what was interesting, this thing created all of a sudden, seemingly it affected the weather, and thunderstorms started. You get this same thing. I actually filmed these dust storms that I've never seen before. It was extremely weird. These filthy, dirty, dark tornadoes that were the height of apartment buildings sort of going by. And on the pictures, there was a couple of these little sort of spear-like things, and you'd almost think that they might have caused it, right? And so I wonder this, there's other ones on films where it shows these little things, and all of a sudden a storm happens. So besides regular storms happening in the regular sort of scientific world out there, what if it's feasible that they also can do this, and they also experiment on such things? Let's see, today we're going to rain hail on, Minnesota, and let's see if the crazy anglers are still going to stay out there and back troll for walleyes with Lindy rigging or something, right? So they do this just to see what sort of people will react under a different sort of thing and thing like that. There's machines out there already. Jesse the Body Ventura went to one of them, where this secret agency had this company had created this beam from outer space that you can shoot up and make things rain, sunny, and all kinds of stuff, and create weather sort of problems and stuff. And now it was built up and bought by the government, and completely sort of, you can't find any information about it, anything. But they claim that the secretly stuff leaked out that these guys could actually shoot a beam across the world and affect, maybe cause a storm here and stuff like this. So can you imagine these kind of characters, if some sort of alien life gave them this sort of information or whatever sort of, and they wanted to see what you're going to do by using this. Of course, they have powers that it's not going to affect them any, but they would see like what you might do with it, sort of things like this. So giving you little bits of advancements at a time in different locations where they know the people can handle it and what they're going to do, and they have a basic idea, and then they sort of study it from there, right? Sort of idea like that. So it's very feasible, besides regular sort of weather out there, Mother Nature, that also these sort of vehicle crafts might have ability to affect weather around them. Here's one of the most amazing, silly, sort of Joe Nicholas sort of answers you get out here, that this was a balloon. It is the most insane sort of answer I've ever heard, how any people can insult over 500 sort of militia army people and say that they're this mentally retarded that they miss for 5 minutes and they all mass panic. I find the most insulting things to these great warriors that sort of help protect us in the wars and all this kind of stuff like this. I mean, what an insult to these wonderful sort of people. I mean, these people are trained to not panic, that this is how we win wars and stuff like this. And they're not going to shoot at something for 5 minutes, a balloon, and make a mistake like this. It's not feasible. So here's why it's not feasible in multi ways. You can clearly see, I blew it up this time, there is an outline of a ship there. It's triangular shaped. It's not even a regular flying saucer. You can actually see perfect sort of level lines, like as if you took a ruler and sort of went down it. There's lights positioned on it all along the edge of the sort of craft, and in the center there's a much more powerful sort of light. It's seemingly these guys were beaming their lights at that main light as maybe to help as a target sort of thing. Maybe that's what they thought, the best to shoot it in the center or whatever like this. So for 5 minutes they shot 1,400 rounds. You're telling me if this was a balloon that instantly this wouldn't have, there's no way you could miss. You can see all the lights here. You can see even fire seemingly, possibly in one of the lights there. You can see these sort of shrapnel-like stuff, little flickers going up. So that's probably them blasting this sort of thing. Interestingly, for 5 minutes, nothing happens to the ship. They claimed it was a weather balloon, yet not a single piece of weather balloon was ever found. Anybody that believes that was a weather balloon is way bigger than, it's not shaped like a weather balloon at all. It has a powerful light source and many other little lights coming off of it. I'm not talking about the beams that are shooting up. I'm talking about the little lights on the sides of it and stuff. You can see some are fogged out, some are in a pattern, and then there seems to be a brighter light in the center that all these beams are homing in at, sort of thing. So maybe that's its exhaust area or whatever, and they decided to sort of shoot at that area. This thing flew away 5 minutes later, sort of idea. That was the end of it. Of course, they blamed it on everything from swamp gas to mass panic, right? So all I can tell you is this guy, if it was a balloon, would have never even been able to snap this picture. It would have already been starting to sink by this time, or misshapen in shape. No balloon could withstand 500 rounds of sort of shooting at it like this. But a macho spaceship from outer space with advanced technology, yeah, they probably could do such a thing and probably laugh at such sort of stuff, right? So they might have some kind of, like in Star Trek, some kind of, I don't know, force field that protects it or some kind of weird thing, right? So here, interesting, you can see the advancement, the same thing over these nuclear places. Worldwide, you get these reports where they were leaked out from some of their workers that their nuclear bomb sort of technology was actually being turned on and off. And here's some way back many decades ago before the CGI, and there's sort of all filming above this sort of testing area, right? So again, influence, right? They want to check anytime that people are advancing in certain sort of ways. They want to make sure that they can shut off their equipment to prevent whatever it is. Because, I mean, let's say some nuts here decided to test this and they shoot it out. Well, maybe they don't want that. Maybe they don't want the Kim Jong-un to blow up a quarter of the world. So they're going to make sure that it isn't done to protect us from ourselves, because they want the experiment to still go on, right? Sort of idea. Here, Ward, Colorado, 1929. This amazing photo was checked out by experts, considered authentic and not tampered with. Sort of thing like that. Early UFOs here, 68, 3 of them flying over in Peru there. There was a hilarious one in Vegas that was pretty funny at the Celine Dion concert. This Celine Dion was blasting away, probably the Titanic or something, and this UFO was actually near this area and started wavering and hovering like as if it was having problems. Could that be our protection from these aliens taking us over, is by simply recording a Dion and a Bieber sort of a stuff there, and get it on a high megaphone and blast it out at these aliens? It might cause sort of some kind of problem to their aircraft. It's just an interesting side note, but extremely funny. You can actually find a photo of it online where they took different photos of it. You can see it looks like it's wigging, waggling. So, the big Celine Dion voice there blasting into outer space might have some kind of effect on the aliens, which is good. So thank goodness for Celine Dion there. Keep buying her albums and blast them out your window as much as you can. That'll keep the aliens from taking us over quicker, right? The more we can enjoy it, the better. But here, 65, Santa Ana, California, this UFO was photographed. Very interesting. And again, they're researching. They're floating over in airports sort of stuff. You get all kinds of them where they're around airports, seemingly monitoring any sort of plane-like activities or what we do or that sort of thing like that. Here back in the 60s, Minneapolis, Minnesota, they were probably analyzing all the wild ice fishermen out there jigging sturgeon sort of decoys and stuff like that that looked like giant musky lures, sort of idea under the ice to get the big lake sturgeon, this kind of stuff. I was down there with I saw some really old examples. This guy had one from, he said his great-grandfather had made it or something way back in the 1800s, and these crazy guys will cut a big sort of cut sheet out of the ice, big square. They'll put a tarp over themselves so they can, the light isn't sort of thing like this, and they'll jig these sort of giant baits to attract the sturgeon to come near it out of curiosity. Then they spear them. Some of these guys have been almost yanked down the holes and all kinds of stuff, right? So maybe these guys were checking out the early linders. They're seeing their techniques of early walleye sort of stuff, watching them back in the day, what secrets Ron was up to and young Al and that sort of thing, right? So Maybe that's what they were doing, monitoring the Minnesota ice fishermen or whatever. But anyway, it's sort of thing. But very interesting, and you clearly see it's a pretty huge object there, whatever it is, right? Sort of thing. 61 Saskatchewan here, the Silver Beast floated by here, so very interesting. Uh, uh, Here, this one, 1950s. I'm not too impressed with this simply because it looks quite small compared to the trees, and it's kind of hat shaped. Like there was hats that was kind of designed like that. So I suppose some guy could have chucked it up, sort of way high up in the air, sort of a hat or something, and then sort of taken a picture like that, and that would be that strawish color up at the top there, sort of. You can actually see like a weaving like thing in it. So I'm highly suspicious this actually was a hat or some kind of similar like thing to that. Maybe the guy put like a false bottom on it to make it look better or whatever, right? I have no idea, but it doesn't look very big. So either it's a very small sort of tracking alien-like craft, or more likely a fraudulent one compared to some of the other ones I'm showing you. This one's much more impressive. This was found in '64, and one of the most excellent earlier ones you can find. You can see perfectly there's a power source there. You can see landing gear on it, the wheels. The metal seems of a sort of a more graphite sort of nature. We didn't have such things then, sort of thing like that. There's a lot of stuff about it. There's a sheen you can see off one of the corner points is sort of like this, that it's a highly sort of interesting metallic sort of stuff here. You can see the viewing platform above it and very UFO-ish. Plus, there's quite a power source there of this big, bright red leg sort of light there. It's not typical of normal planes or any kind of other sort of thing that we would have had. It seems you'd have to have a lot of good power source there of some kind of wild battery contraptions to make that. So, and the size of it looks compared good to the background there of the mountains and stuff like that. It seems fairly high up in the air. So I would, and it's extremely stable. If it was something shot up in the air, it should have already been wobbling, sort of, right? So, and it doesn't look like it's windy out or stuff like that. Like even the trees seem to be standing up fairly sort of normal or stuff like that. So, all in all, I would give this one a more higher credibility than many of them, right? Sort of thing like this. Here, the Costa Rican government in '71 sort of released these sort of early ones. This one's interesting here. Like, I don't know if that's a house in the background there or if it's a set of trees. It's hard to tell exactly what that is. It's a bit blurry. But whatever the case, it's interesting that, again, that this UFO is homing in on the odd anomaly in the area. Like, you got this great big field, you got the mountains, you got all this, but you got this strange sort of structural object there, either a set of trees or some kind of structure there, a house, a smaller house, a farmhouse or some sort, whatever. But the thing is actually homing in on the unusual piece of structural thing. So wouldn't it be logical, a high advanced society, they would notice this? Like, if all the terrain is sort of bushy and all of a sudden there's a gleaming object in the middle of it, this might be of interest because it isn't fitting in with the regular topography, right? Sort of thing like that. So maybe they sort of analyze things like that or whatever, right? Here in New Delhi, '64, this photo showed above. Again, seemingly this interest. You find this in churches since ancient times of UFOs hovering over them. Burns, even all of our major White House, the Kremlin, all of them have these sort of records of UFOs seemingly monitoring them. So they seem to have an interest in our architecture as well and that sort of thing for sure. This one I'm not sure about. It kind of reminds me of a top, actually. There was early tops when I was a kid. I'd play with these. A lot of toys I was given that was made from earlier decades and stuff that somebody would have or whatever, and they'd just say, "Oh, hey, here, have it for your son," yeah, sort of thing, like that sort of thing. And I mean, that one really reminds me of those early sort of tops. It was built exactly sort of like that. But I mean, I don't know. It's a weird one. It's not distinct enough one way or the other. I can't really I mean, the guy could have shot it up in the air close to him. That gives it the illusion that it's bigger in the background. I mean, that sort of thing. So I don't find that that convincing, but I can't say that it's not authentic either. It's just one of those ones, right? This one's much more impressive. You can see it's fairly large. It's way, way higher. It's certainly not a frisbee up in the air or any of these sort of weird stuff. Perfectly level. And back in the 40s, I mean, Poland especially, a lot of these countries are poorer and stuff like this. So when these guys took a photograph shot, they're not just wasting them for something to do, right? And it's certainly not a balloon or any sort of other thing. It's not an airplane and that sort of thing. So I would find that sort of a pretty decent, convincing one. This one's extremely convincing. 1950s. You can see the perfect symmetry. Every cut is perfect from the necks of the light system. The incredible bright power source in the center of it. So this thing looks to me like it's designed for speed, and this sucker probably really can go as sort of thing like this. It has a much more brighter power source than a lot of the ones that you see, and so this particular design definitely has a much more, it seems, you wouldn't have had any sort of toys back then that you could have used really that would have sort of been that good like that or any of that sort of stuff like that. So and there certainly wasn't drones floating around like this or any of that sort of thing. So I would say that this one's also extremely convincing. It's certainly not a meteorite, and apparently that was tested, not tampered with, and this sort of thing like that. So I would find that one sort of a pretty decent one. Here's one I never saw before. I have no idea. It could be later 1800s, early 1900s. The only reason we're guessing that is because the houses here, these are sort of ones you find sort of like in Montreal, Quebec, different places where they built piles of them like that. I'm sure there's some in the States, ones like this, but wherever this was from, you can clearly see that giant, very similar to that one in Minnesota or some of those other ones there. So some kind of weird glowing sort of thing there, wherever it is. But it's certainly an early one because they look pretty old. That's old design, those houses and stuff like that. But you can see though that there's posts there, so. That's the thing too, is that I would guess like probably more in the like 1910s 20s sort of range or something like that. Probably. But I mean, whatever the case, anyways, it's certainly quite an old one, way before Photoshop and all that sort of stuff. So, here another interesting one with three UFOs here. I mean, they're extremely high in the sky and very bizarre shapes and sort of stuff like that. Now, here in 1972, just to prove to you how waste of time the SETI sort of stuff is and a lot of these other ones, you can clearly see that, I mean, what was that? This matches what I just showed you here, different photographs of a typical UFO. This thing's hovering there. There shouldn't be anything there. It's monitoring and watching us. Maybe that's why they don't go to the moon, or they do go to the moon and we don't know about it, and they have some kind of deal with these kind of characters or whatever, or that they saw these guys fully knew well about them and said, oh my God, no, there really is alien life watching us, sort of stuff like this. So there's no use paying SETI to send out swamp gas signals and this sort of thing like this, because they fully already are aware of their presence, right? And that would make sort of sense like that, much more likely sort of thing, why you would sort of do that behavior, stop their funding and all that kind of stuff, because simply there's no use paying for something that you already know exists, right? But you can't acknowledge it. Here over mountains, these three UFOs very impressive. But I forget if that was Italy or Switzerland. Anyways, one of those ones there, and you can clearly see that these three are quite. The guy was, I think this was the one in the train, and the guy was sort of shooting it out, and he sort of got these. I mean, absolutely fantastic. I mean, they're certainly all discs. There's three of them. They're sort of like quite large. You can tell them they've sort of been, they're far off in the distance. There's no way somebody could have shot something up there to get that sort of a picture quickly, and that sort of thing like that is way before the CGI and all that sort of stuff. So I'd say that's a fairly credible one as well. This one's an excellent one, 267, Pueblo, Mexico. Look at the power up of that sort of stuff. This is in 67 here. It was quite large. You can see lights that are hidden inside this thing. So, I mean, this guy would have had to come up with a lot of weird sort of contraptions here, and power sources and 5 million batteries and everything and all electricity to sort of create this fakeness here for what reason, right? So they tested it and it's authentic. It wasn't tampered with and that sort of stuff. The thing is way up in the sky. So then you'd still have to claim that this guy built his own sort of UFO to get it up there to take the film, right? So, like, it's pretty fairly convincing, sort of, because of the time here it was done and the people that have tested it and everything. A lot of sort of stuff has been done over it. So it's very passable, sort of, that, yeah, that probably really was a UFO. Here, when you idiotics get to claim this was a meteor, so if you actually believe that, I mean, really, you need some severe glasses, right? Sort of stuff like that, or you're living in a massive denial world, because, I mean, these kinds have been reported since the Bible there, of the thing, the cylinder that was feeding the Israelites, all this kinds of stuff. These kinds of shapes are also very common. They're not as remotely common as a regular flying saucer, but I suggest these are some kind of stop-off spots, or maybe they hold supplies, or maybe their agenda is just simply to film things, to record or whatever, right? And they quietly go along, and the other spaceships then grab the information or whatever. Who knows? Like some kind of wacky sort of stereo like that. But definitely these things can cloak. They appear and disappear in a blink of an eye, sort of thing like that. And this sort of stuff, and are just technologies of radar and things like that. Don't pick them up unless they're uncloaked or whatever it is. Then occasionally it does or whatever. Yeah, because it's a solid object. They're not concerned whether you know of their presence or not. They're not scared of you. Let's put it that way, sort of idea, right? But very interesting. But this also looks very much like the ones they showed in the 1500s that had crashed. Exactly the same kind of things like that. So it could be that these things carry some kind of ammunition for others, fuel supply, a sandwich and a poutine. I have no idea, but whatever. Maybe some cannabis indicus or stuff like that. Some Labatt, whatever, right? But whatever the reason, I think these have some other purpose than normal sort of UFOs that are seen, right? Here, if you don't still believe that, even if you believe all these things were imaginary up to this point, these are on government satellite dishes all over the world. There's not one, there's several of them. In ancient times, there's stories of a giant lightning bolts being shot from a godlike figure into the volcano and stopping it. All, of course, written about thousands of times by writers stating, of course, it was mythology. I say that it wasn't mythology here, because here's real evidence that it exists. There's numerous ones of these. Now, think about this. You have nothing in the sky. You can clearly see up into the heavens as far as you can see. All of a sudden, mysteriously on film, you see a flash of an outline of an object of some sort, and then poof, this thing's there. It's just instantly there. Now it perfectly, think of the odds of this, it perfectly each time is able to fly inside of a volcano, explode or implode. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but whatever, once it goes in there, it does something of some kind of explosion, and this shuts off the volcano. And so you have ancient records describing it, you have them on film now. This power source seems way more sort of advanced than we would have. You're telling me, like, you telling me if Kim Jong-un or the gang or anybody was floating around and they didn't have something like that, that they wouldn't be blasting this on some of our sort of places or things like this, or use this for other technologies? Why wouldn't you, right? But my question is why do they allow a lot of volcanoes to happen and then other ones, they protect them like this? So is it that somebody lives there that monitors that they don't want to be sort of have any issues? They got a plan for the place and they don't want it destroyed or whatever. It's part of their scheme of their study or whatever, right? This kind of sort of methodology. But I find that most fascinating, sort of interesting proof like this to me, even if I never saw a UFO in the sky, even if I'd never spoken to witnesses that have seen them, even if I'd never seen all these films and pictures, even if I had not read through thousands of historic accounts of flying saucers being seen in the skies, even if all of that stuff, if I wasn't knowledgeable about any of those things, if I seen that thing from a film coming from the skies, I'm still going to wonder how on earth this is possible, because I know it's not a lightning bolt. I know it couldn't be by chance. This is intelligently deliberately sort of shot there. You clearly see this thing appear out of nowhere. It's definitely a sort of object, and it has seemingly powers of great power that we likely probably wouldn't have. That's an energy source, so I suspect that these ships that they use and everything run off of some wild sort of stuff that's very resupplyable. That's or sort of that it's a magnetic like thing of some sort where the thing recycles itself, some kind of perpetual energy, and such things exist already on our planet. They've created this in dams and stuff using giant magnets where it'll just keep rolling and they don't have to, it'll just keep creating electricity, right? So all that kind of stuff is very feasible, especially for a much more advanced sort of race. This one here is one of the most fascinating sort of things. Like, I mean, even if you're still a skeptic, and even if not one single person ever saw a UFO in human history, how would you explain this? This is a CCTV sort of thing on it. It wasn't tampered with. Stuttgart. It was appeared on their local news and all this sort of stuff. Piles of people saw it on the highway. The guy with police was all there. It's all extremely well recorded. It happened. Guaranteed this occurred. A giant beam from outer space shoots down, picks up a guy's truck, lifts it way up in the air, shoots it sideways, conveniently doesn't even harm this guy. He gets out of the truck. Inside of his 18-wheeler, he opens it up. There's no contents inside of it. Conveniently, all around it is little blobs of molten metal. That's all that they find. So somehow some beam from outer space shot down there was able to dematerialize objects inside of a solid container, evaporate them, and make them reappear possibly in their ship or whatever's up there that shot this beam, okay? This exact thing, same thing has happened in the past. There's an old book you can find, and I don't remember when it was even written, if it was the 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, some kind of era like this. This weird sort of either a famous bank or some kind of famous building. It was either Chicago, New York, LA, one of the big cities. There's this book, and he's got this story about this fascinating weird UFO like thing where this flying saucer was seen over the building. I wish somebody could find this for me because I don't remember what it was called or whatever. And I read it many years ago, but when I saw this, I remembered the molten metal that they mentioned. So how could this be? I mean, really think about this. This inside this Fort Knox-ish like place, it might have even been Fort Knox, whatever it was some kind of big famous building. And somehow this beam, this UFO was seen over the building. They watched this beam exactly as you're seeing on this film, shoot seemingly going through the building. Inside this high security place with all these vaults and everything, this stuff that was in there, whatever it was, money or some kind of testing material, whatever, something really important, all evaporated out of there, mysteriously vanished, and they found molten pieces of metal inside. That's all they could find. And this matches identical to, so this guy's film corroborates that story 100% because everything is identical with the pieces of little molten metal, yet nothing else is damaged around it and all this sort of stuff. Who the hell has that kind of technology? I mean, that is petrifying, right? So even if you want to believe it's humans doing this with secret military stuff, this means that the military could go by there, you and your, I don't know, your wife and your kids are driving by, and you got 2 Big Macs and a Rotten Ronnie's fry, and they're hungry. These guys could beam this thing down there, zap it out of your hands, and sort of and start having lunch. So they might save you an early death from eating that crap. But the thing is, really, would anybody feel comfortable that such things exist out there? So, of course, nobody's going to know about this. And the people that know this information certainly wouldn't share it with anybody else, right? Nobody in their right mind would do that because, I mean, you got a technology that you could now use to steal anything you want or to sort of get information and all this sort of stuff like that, right? So, I mean, whatever was that seems extremely advanced for our sort of stuff, right? So I would say that's extremely sort of convincing, considering that there's correlating stories out there. Even in ancient times, there's weird stories of some beam coming from the heavens and the place vanished or whatever, right? These kind of weird, similar, like sort of thing, not exactly described the same, but similar, where you might correlate that they're actually talking about the same sort of thing. Here's some famous crashes. Here, there was the the Shag Harbor incident. Everybody talks about that one in Nova Scotia there, and Shag Harbor's sort of shallow there. And all these guys said that it was some kind of crap-like thing that had smashed the Berwyn Mountain incidents. There was men in black sort of people around. They quarantined the place. Bodies were supposed to have been recovered, and the same sort of thing like the Roswell, where all of a sudden the whole area was sort of taken over by the sort of military and all that sort of stuff like that. And there's all these kinds of ones like that. There's quite a few of these crashes that you can find from the 1800s and different ones that not too many people mention. But I'm not going to go on about any of these. I'm actually, this is probably so for these MUFON people or anybody out there that is sort of interested in this sort of thing like this. The one from Ottawa, there was a crash here that should be talked about way more. And sadly, I never sort of told everybody the whole sort of story. Both times I kind of got cut off. Had to stop the camera, the rolling of the sort of tapes of these things a few times, and forgot what I was talking about and got on to something else and that sort of thing. So I'll explain to you exactly what occurred here, where we actually watched some kind of a ship from either outer space or that is some kind of high military advanced sort of stuff crash in the Gatineau-Ottawa River sort of area. We were night fishing out. I was out with these two brothers, Thomas and his brother, I think it was which one it was because I used to guide people nightly out for catfish and sturgeon stuff like this, and all the time we had three or four in the boat, and a lot of these guys were characters, comedians, all kinds of stuff. So one night is like the next sort of that part, and I was so interested in what was going on that I sort of the rest of the evening is almost tuned out. I sort of focused all on that, so I'm not 100% sure who that was, but I was with these two brothers anyways, and whoever the third guy was, but we were casting along sort of, and it had gotten into the night and stuff like this, and I was working these bays, this backwater bay across from the sort of Rideau Falls sort of area, and we were working along, and all of a sudden we saw this sort of bright sort of light going at a super sort of fast speed at a sort of a weird angle. Look up, you see this sort of strange craft. It was bright, brilliant red. It was not a meteorite. It was a solid steel like sort of object of some sort. It was not exactly like a flying saucer. It had a little bit of a triangle-ish weird shape to it. So between round and triangle-ish, it was different than any of the ones I've typically seen on film or any of this sort of stuff like this. But it was pure, bright sort of red. And I know it was a machine because on the side of it there was one blinking light that was making a blinking sequence very different from what planes you see. I live near an area where I can see planes going by all this sort of time, and I see them every night with the blinking sort of stuff like this. I know how these sorts of work, and I've been watching them since I was a kid. And this is very different. This was not an airplane. It didn't have wings like an airplane. It didn't have any of that sort of thing like this. This thing was going at an incredibly fast speed, and it sort of, we only saw it for probably about 3 seconds, and it was sort of went around this sort of this tree edge where the trees are in front of us on the side, sort of it sort of blocked its view and it vanished. So we said, what the hell was that? And we wondered if it was some kind of new sort of secret military craft or some kind of thing, or some kind of weird sort of thing somebody invented or whatever. But it seemed that whatever it was pure bright red. It had a power source way beyond any sort of normal plane or any of the stuff I've seen out in the skies of different advanced stuff that we supposedly have. Nothing looked like anything like this, and the sequence of this light was very different, and it was quite bright, extremely a high bright. So I'd say whatever was running this ship had a lot of power to it. It's not a meteorite. I guarantee you this 1,000,000% of this. I saw it extremely close and crystal clear. We were in this sort of bay sort of area here, sort of thing, and it's right, like this thing was only probably about 300 feet in the sky up above us, sort of going down at a sort of an angle, right? So, anyways, the thing vanished. We kept talking about it, wondering what on earth it could have been and that sort of thing like that, but just kept casting away and didn't really think nothing of it and had no idea that it actually crashed. We started going around, and finally we were going to go and night fish in this sort of Gatineau River here, and one of our usual hangouts, and sort of fish for these giant drum and sort of sturgeon and catfish and things like that, eels and all that sort of stuff, and all the typical ones we would get. Occasionally you'd get other sort of monster-like creatures, a giant eye, or even a muskie. Occasionally would bite on these weird things. Like, you'd get the odd other rare sort of fish, but I mean, mostly that's what we'd be hunting for, is like giant drum and sort of catfish and sturgeon and stuff. And we get around this sort of thing, and all of a sudden we see these army trucks there. There's police in behind where they're not allowed to go in. There's piles of these guys coming out in some kind of weird, like frogmen-like suits, where they were meeting other guys that were going now into the water. There were strange men that were standing up on the side of the bank that seemingly had some kind of weird hazmatic-like suits on them and stuff like this. Now, here's the interesting thing. There was ambulances outside that were not allowed to seemingly go past this sort of area, but one ambulance was there. The army guys all circled around them on both sides and sort of escorted them, sort of walking along sort of with them a little bit. And these characters went down there, and there was these two body bags that was laying on this dock. These guys were struggling, seemingly carrying these things, bringing them back, and they were walking with them. They covered every angle to make sure seemingly nobody could see too sort of much, but they didn't notice us or the other ones out in the river, because from their vantage point, you don't really see too well, sort of like we're in a darker sort of position around a sort of a corner, and I guess they didn't sort of notice us, luckily, a sort of thing like this, because that would have even creeped us out. I'd imagine we would have been sort of, you didn't see anything, right? That's sort of the idea, right? So we were sort of even, we kept the lights off in the boat and just kept watching and staring with curiosity what's really going on here. So then obviously we surmised that whatever we saw went over that thing, that must have been what crashed there, right? And it would make sense to us, right? So that's what we figured, and we said, oh my God, maybe that was some kind of alien-like thing or something that landed there. So anyways, these guys, these frogmen, when one of the group of frogmen sort of came out of the water, they walked towards these guys in the ambulance and started talking to them, and then they went with these army guys. The frogmen stayed there, but the army guys, along with these ambulance guys, went down to the dock and picked up these things and seemingly were struggling carrying them. So you got two guys carrying each sort of body bag, and they sunk. They looked like there was something inside of them, okay? So nobody knows about this. It's not been put in any sort of thing like that. The MUFON people don't know about it. Not a single one out there, but this is actual fact, and I can guarantee you this occurred, and I can also guarantee you that numerous other boats was out there that evening actually saw this as well, or at least parts of some of these things. Maybe they didn't see it as well as us, but I'm sure they saw some of it, because we even ran in across boaters later that had mentioned that, yeah, they saw all the rigmarole there, but nobody seemed to want to talk about it too much, right? But anyways, these guys went right, guarded by these army guys, and they went back into the sort of ambulance and covered sort of make sure that nobody was sort of looking at them. Mysteriously, way down the street, about 4 or 5 blocks, was a pile of these gigantic limo-like Men in Blackish sort of cars that you would see that the president might have. Like guards, like big giant limos, sort of things like this. And these guys got out of it, and they were all speaking to each other, seemingly not wanting anybody down the street to know of their existence or anything like this. Then all of a sudden, a medium-sized black Men in Black car comes along. Either they rolled down the window, I presume, because you couldn't see, it was dark, like all you could see is that it seemingly they stopped and they were talking to these guys, probably. That's what it looked like anyways. And several of them got in the back of the car with them, and their vehicles stayed there. They went along. They all of a sudden went up and seemingly were able to walk right past the military people without them even questioning them. So how do they know who they are? I find that weird, right? So somehow these guys had extreme power, whoever they were, And they walked up to these guys and they started analyzing with these ambulance people, and they were all pointing down. You could see them all covering over the opening where the body bags were laid in there. All of a sudden, then these other divers came out again, and they went up and sort of on the edge and started talking to them and seemingly telling them, I guess that was it, sort of whatever it is that was down there. They couldn't find any more. This is what we're presuming, just guessing, but probably that's what they were doing. And then all of a sudden, this stuff started packing up some of it. So the police were still held outside. The army sort of quarantined the whole sort of thing. They wouldn't allow sort of anything except these men in black weird dudes and sort of the ones, the divers there in the hazmat guy suits. All of these characters started disappearing into different sort of army sort of vehicles. And then here's what now is extremely interesting. The men in black guys got out, they went and got back in the vehicle and sort of just sat there. Now the ambulance with these trucks of the army all circled around with the ambulance, and they slowly started going, and I mean slowly, all down, and they passed the police without even speaking to them. They didn't allow the police to go any further. They didn't do any of this sort of stuff like this. They kept going up. So what normal ambulance doesn't just drive off by himself? Why does he need an escort of army trucks? And why are they going so slow? And why was the other ambulance people not allowed to see it? That's really weird, right? So they claimed that they found nothing, they didn't know what it was, and sort of then they just passed it off as a meteor. This is the biggest cover up in history. They found something in there. It was a ship of some sort. So either it was a military device that they were testing on that they don't want you to know about, or it really was a crash sort of a thing. Or another feasibility that we thought up that was interesting is that a few days later, we were out night fishing in there, and I noticed this anomaly in this one spot where it seemed to be several feet sort of deeper than typical. And the only time you get these things is in high spring rains or stuff like this. It'll make a wash, sort of a hole out in the bottom of the river, or it'll flood up more with debris, or weird stuff like this where you might get a fluctuation in depth a little bit, some silt washed in, whatever, that sort of thing like that. But this was consistent weather. None of this should have occurred. None of the depths had changed previously for weeks and anything else. So it seemed extremely strange, and it was exactly around the area where they were diving around. So my presumption is that what if this ship actually shot into the water, but sort of made a bit of a bounce, but is so macho and tough that maybe only a small piece or two busted off a bit, and the thing just kept going and flying underwater and repaired itself somehow and went back into outer space, as far as you know. So, because I mean, you would have thought if they actually found like a ship or anything, I would have thought there would have even been more sort of people involved with this, even more quarantine for blocks. And I would have also thought that there'd be, but what if they actually just found maybe a small little pieces of, like, I don't know, maybe the thing's got a tail fin of some sort or some weird little thing. And maybe that's why they had first brought in the body bags thinking it's a crash sort of plane or airship or whatever they might have thought. So they get them out there, but then they decided to not be contaminated. They might have put them inside of such a thing as sort of a container maybe of some sort. So I don't know the answer here. Did they recover bodies, or did they recover parts, or both, right? But whatever the case, or did they actually, because the ship wasn't that big, maybe they had already gotten this thing before we got there. It probably took us, like I said, 20 minutes or half an hour before the sight of the light we saw go down and sort of around the trees, from that point to when we actually got to this point where we could see these sort of things. For days after running into people along the river, asking around, did you see the weird sort of stuff like that? All of them sort of just didn't seem to want to talk about it too much, but did acknowledge that they saw something or whatever, right? So, I mean, also I would suspect that all the residents right there in the street, it's impossible that some of them weren't home likely, like not that many people likely would all have been gone at that time. I highly suspect that these guys approached their doors and said, don't stick your heads out the windows, don't do this, you didn't see anything, whatever, and sort of a warning. I wouldn't be surprised. right? Sort of thing like that. But I bet you some investigator went along all those homes, you'd probably get somebody out there that'd be willing to talk about it a little bit, sort of like this, and they might have seen some of these things. They would have not been able to see the sort of stuff we saw because we could see this from a darkened part of the river where the lights was in the background of them, so they lit up well and you could see them. But if you were in a house, sort of, you'd be facing them by the back, you wouldn't have seen a lot of this sort of stuff. So, but they certainly would be able to corroborate these sort of men in black sort of stuff and some of the other weird sort of things out there. I'm sure some of these things were seen by others, right? So, anyways, that's an historic sort of fact. Guarantee you that's what we saw. And so I will, like I said, I can't tell you it was from outer space. And even if it wrecks my credibility or whatever, I don't care. I'd even take a lie detector test for it. That's what we saw. Right? So, like, I mean, it doesn't matter. That's what we saw. It was some weird sort of thing, right? So I believe that whatever it was pretty weird, right? And they certainly hushed up about it. So they talk about the Shag Harbor and all the other ones, and all those are great too, and probably the same things occurred. But certainly our Air Force, Army, all these sort of people, they know way more than what they talk about of this sort of thing, and sort of it's hushed up. And they protect even where the police and other people can't get around these sort of things to make sure they don't see anything so that they'll believe the meteorite theory too. I notice that it's always sort of really well designed here. They have a plans, they work at a certain sort of level, and they follow procedures directly, and this is why it works. They always just report back it was a weather balloon, it was a taco after gas, anything like that. It was a flare, it was a Bugs Bunny's relative that was drunk. It doesn't matter anything at all as long as it's not admitting that, yeah, there really was a saucer there or some kind of military secret that they're using, right? So that's what they do. So, so anyway, so, here's what it kind of sort of looked like. It was thinner, sort of like that. It wasn't very big. I'd say about 3 to 4 car lengths maximum long. It had one sort of light that seemed to be about 3/4 away back of the sort of space vehicle, whatever it was. It certainly, again, was not a meteorite. I guarantee that this thing was a metallic sort of object of some sort that had an incredibly bright power source to it that sort of, I doubt we really have this sort of technology. I saw, me personally, I think it was sort of probably from up there, but I mean, I don't know. I'm willing to sort of at least sit on the fence of it that I can't say one way or the other. So it could have been a military experiment as possible, but it certainly wasn't a flare. It wasn't a balloon. It wasn't a Bigfoot's mother-in-law. It wasn't any of that sort of stuff. And other people saw this, and even the marinas around there was mention of all that sort of stuff like this, all kinds of boaters and stuff like that. Some of these people would have saw some of this stuff probably too. But again, I think this was just hushed up, and because they didn't know about all these boaters out there, I'm sure they would have approached us too and said, you didn't see anything, did you? Right? And that sort of thing, right? When you find in the Freedom of Information Act, almost every word is read it out. There's almost nothing you can read about it. So is that not suspicious, right? So I mean, whatever, right? So it doesn't matter. I mean, that nobody's going to believe my sort of thing, and a handful of witnesses here and sort of thing like that. They're still going to argue it was swamp gas and stuff. But I think it should be recorded, and it was something that I saw of an extremely sort of weird sort of thing out there. I also saw with a lady a sort of silver disc out in the St. Lawrence River that was chased by unmarked helicopters once. So, and a couple other weird things up in the sky that I couldn't explain that went by very quick that I couldn't sort of really get too much of an angle on them, what they may or may not have been, but they didn't seem to be meteorite-ish or anything sort of like that. So, I mean, really I've had a sighting about once every 15 or 20 years or 10 years sort of thing like that. That's sort of where I've seen something odd up in the sky. So I've been lucky a few times, sort of thing like that. But all of them, I don't know what they were, except this one, and the one in the St. Lawrence for sure was a craft of some sort. The other ones I don't know. I might have could have been some anomaly or something. So I could even discount all of them and just go by the two for sure that I can guarantee that I know that something exists out in our skies. So I don't need any proof of a photograph or anything I've saw with my own eyes, sort of that thing like that. And so for me, it's not a questionable, right? I know by observing a long period of time that a airplane cannot sit and hover over me for at least 5 minutes. I know that an airplane can't blast from one end of the skies to the other in a microsecond and then stop in a dime like that. I also know that I've never seen any helicopters the size that you can drive tanks in them like this. What we saw that were seemingly silent as some kind of technology that barely made a sound. And I also find it weird that they seem to know of this thing's presence. They started heading towards it up in the skies, flying at an angle right towards the thing, even though they were far off. This thing started getting nervous and it sort of flew off, right? So, and it just vanished in a blink of an eye. It was gone. It was a solid silver metallic object. It was fairly large, probably about 100 feet or so in diameter, at least bare minimum, sort of thing like that. It was, I'd say, at least bare minimum 2 to 3 times the size of this thing that we saw going over the Gatineau River, sort of thing like that. And in the same area in the Gatineau River, one of the other sightings that I know could have been a plane or anything, and actually the next day a guy's plane was attacked. We told a bunch of people we were out night fishing the same sort of area. So this area, you could see really good up in the skies, and it could be that this area is maybe used for some kind of interplanetary sort of travel of some sort or whatever, that occasionally they use this sort of mapping area to go and do stuff or whatever. It was, but whatever, another time we saw this purple and sort of orange ball. That's what they look like. They look like a glowing pure bright orange ball. They didn't look like a ship. They looked weird, like just a bright light source, and a purple ball. And both of them were sort of ship-like a sort of shape, but not really sort of like, they were a big blob sort of thing like this, and the two of them were flying right towards each other, and we thought they were going to blow up into each other, and we wondered what the hell they were. Then all of a sudden they just stopped on a dime, seemingly recognized each other, and went off 2 different directions and bolted right up in the sky at speeds that was astonishing. So I mean, I can't imagine that a meteorite can fall down and all of a sudden turn their direction and shoot back up in outer space in a blink of an eye and vanish into the heavens. So that was extremely weird. But I mean, again, you couldn't see them enough to say that they were actually really a craft, or was it some kind of bizarre light effect of some sort up in the heavens, right? Whatever the case, they were pretty weird, but guaranteed I can say for sure 2 times in my life I have seen sort of real solid metallic sort of objects that were definitely either human or alien origin, and not from some other sort of explanation of swamp gas or a burrito aftershoots that I can use an explanation for, right? So anyways, so out of all the UFOs, besides what I've seen in some of the great films and all this sort of stuff like this, interviewing that Muslim couple with the over 10,000 witnesses, this angel flies down from the sky. You see even on one of the videos a mysterious shape-like sort of ship-like object that seems extremely huge up in the sky that might have beamed down this angel. It proves that this angel stories are true, where you're actually seeing this glowing entity there. Its wings comes out of its body exactly as they described. The silly scientists said a person couldn't fly because their wings would have melted. This is their low IQ-ish sort of stuff here, not thinking outside the box, that this is a mighty entity, alien sort of group here with a power source where they actually can conform and change their sort of shape to stuff, and these wings can come out of their body. It's like a power source to help them hover in a position or something, whoever these servants of God may be or whatever, right? Like this sort of thing, or some kind of alien that looks like an angel, whatever. Anyways, in ancient history, in the exact same, so can you imagine the convenience and the odds of that in ancient biblical history, an angel floated over the same sort of temple area and did a similar like thing. So now you have thousands of years later, in front of 10,000 witnesses, multitudes of films, TV cameras picked it up, all kinds of stuff. It's not fake, it's not CGI, it's not anything. The whole Muslim family told me, yeah, yeah, angel, angel, we saw the angel. They all believed it was an angel, sort of thing like this. This thing's glowing and brightening up the whole sky, so you expect that some guy in a suit had some magical power source that could brighten up lights for a mile around him. I mean, come on, seriously. Like, so to me, that's one of the most conclusive sort of evidence films of unknown extraterrestrial from the skies that you could humanly sort of imagine, right? So sort of thing like that. So you should check that out. I have it on my other sort of video there, sort of thing like that, and it correlates with the thousands of ancient texts of what angels look like and all that sort of thing like that. So whatever angels are at the end of the day, whether they're real space aliens or there is a god or whatever, I mean, these things doesn't. The bottom line is something out there exists that represents what people saw, right? And the other way is that we're just supposed to believe it's all fruit juice gas. I mean, come on, really? Like, I mean, you got to wake up here a little bit and realize that, yeah, there could be something to this. I mean, to deny this is, yeah, you know. So after seeing these video, if you're still sort of going to deny this, I can't help you. But